New clashes on the streets of Minneapolis this weekend as Governor Tim Walz mobilizes the state's National Guard, and the Pentagon readies 1,500 soldiers to be deployed to that state. This as the DOJ has launched an investigation into Governor Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey for allegedly impeding ICE agents' ability to carry out their duties. For more on the situation on the ground, let's bring in Minnesota State Senator Dirk Cedergren. Thank you both for joining the Sunday briefing this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this morning, the Pentagon, as we mentioned, readying up to 1,500 troops to deploy if the president invokes the Insurrection Act. You've got clashes between protesters and federal law enforcement officers continuing here after a federal judge has limited what federal agents can do to control these protesters. Here's what Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche said this morning on Fox News Sunday.
You know, set the scene straight away. Hello, everyone. It's a clash between a state and the Pentagon, the state and the federal government, isn't it? ICE agents have gone in with the express aim of removing illegal citizens from the United States of America. And this is going to be happening all over the place, by the way. And you've got, Walz there. And there is evidence, you can look back at the previous video, that things aren't running as they should be. Certain obstructions have been created to stop these ICE agents from doing their job. You look at the tragic death of that woman and the protests that happened as a result. It really is spiraling out of control. And I'll be interested to hear what these two have to say.
They're throwing rocks at ICE officers. They are standing in the roadway when they try to drive by. They're putting their vehicles in the roadway while they try to drive by. So if a judge tells ICE officers not to violate the constitutional rights of protesters, we got it. Instead of going after ICE officers, what should be happening is local leaders should be sending law enforcement out to stop the protesters from assaulting ICE officers for doing nothing except for their job.
Senator Drazkowski,
That is it, exactly. You've got a situation where you've got ICE officers going in to do the job they've been ordered to do, and they're having projectiles and all sorts of things thrown at them by Minnesotans. You've seen the rhetoric coming from Walz. What's happening? Let's see what these guys have to say about it.
Ask you, should President Trump invoke the Insurrection Act?
I'll leave that, Jackie, up to the president and his ability to exercise prudence. These people have taken over the Democrat Party here. They're pervasive throughout the Walz administration, and they're populating and directing the Democrat majority in our legislature. They have no respect for the rule of law or the people tasked with upholding it. I think the important thing is that the president continue on his path and do the best that he can to make sure that the people finish their job. And I'm sure he will exercise prudence as he has done repeatedly.
Yeah, you've got the Department of Justice now investigating Minnesota officials, including Governor Walz and also Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, for allegedly impeding law enforcement's ability to do their jobs. Walz told people to collect evidence against ICE in a special address this week. And a tipster reported this email to city employees Friday, alleging, this tipster says, they are working with protesters within the city to help them track down ICE operations. This seems like they are complicit in helping impede ICE agents. Would they like it if we impeded and told people where Minneapolis police officers were trying to do their work? This seems like it is an insurrection. That's what the tipster said. Dirk, what is your sense on the ground?
Before we hear from him, there's one thing that I want to mention, which I came up with in my previous video, is that Walz, in a statement that I read out by his own word, by his own hand, has encouraged citizens of Minnesota to walk up to these ICE agents, right? Phone. I'll demonstrate, oh, hi. What am I pulling out of my pocket? If you're trained to react, I'm going to get a gun in my nose. It's completely irresponsible rhetoric all around. And, you've heard it that they're impeding the work of these enforcement officers who are going in there to do a job. I've seen videos of people screaming Second Amendment, and they're being encouraged with talk of civil war and all the rest of it. It is absolutely out of control. Now, they mention the Insurrection Act, which is pretty relevant. And just to let everybody know what the Insurrection Act actually is, I've dug a article up. I think it's very important, and here it is here, just in case people are unaware. Just read the first couple of paragraphs. The Insurrection Act of 1807, or just the Insurrection Act, is the US federal law that empowers the President of the United States to nationally deploy the US Armed Forces and to federalize the National Guard units of individual states in specific circumstances, such as the suppression of civil disorder. What are we seeing of insurrection and of armed rebellion against the federal government of the United States? The Insurrection Act provides a statutory exception to the Posse Comitatus Act 1878 that limits the president's deploying the US military to enforce either civil or criminal law within the United States. So, in other words, if you know, this situation gets any more out of control than it already is, then you're going to look at the Insurrection Act if necessary. He's mentioned it. He has mentioned it. Let's continue.
Resident business owner there. Do you see a coordinated effort among Minnesota officials to try to impede ICE from doing their jobs?
Well, Governor Walz on the 14th did an address on TV, and it was a very inflammatory statement. All the things he used about pregnant women being dragged through the streets, and ICE is untrained or poorly trained. I know people that in the Rochester school system, about 75 miles south, are being told to impede ICE and to hide vulnerable students from ICE. I have another person I know who works in the Minneapolis school system who had a meeting, and they were told to, if ICE showed up, they were to lock the doors and not let them in, impeding federal agents.
This is coming from school officials to school employees, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, wow. Mayor Frey said...
Do you hear that? Impede the work of federal agents coming into the area to do a job. And you wonder why possible criminal charges are being talked about against Walz and, you know, potentially other people as well. And when you use inflammatory rhetoric, you know, one thing that we all get in public spaces is that anything you say and anything you do when you're in certain positions, you're looked up to, you're listened to. Look at the footage. Look at the footage. Unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it.
Said that this probe about, you know, allegations of impeding ICE is meant to intimidate him. Governor Walz made the case that the DOJ is being weaponized by the Trump administration. He said, quote, 2 days ago, it was Alyssa Slotkin. Last week, it was Jerome Powell. Before that, Mark Kelly. Weaponizing the justice system and threatening political opponents is a dangerous authoritarian tactic. The only person not being investigated for the shooting of Renee Good is the federal agent who shot her. Senator, I'll ask you, do you think that calmer heads would prevail if the FBI allowed state investigators access to this investigation or made it public?
No, I don't, Jackie. They have an agenda. Tim Walz is losing oil pressure rapidly. A large and growing number of Minnesotans would really like to see him in jail. And we will see articles of impeachment introduced in the Minnesota House when the legislature convenes on the 17th of next month. He is complicit in the theft of over $9 billion by many of the same people that have been attacking federal officers for the past 2 weeks. He will condition any sort of investigation that the state does in order to continue to try to fit the far left narrative, which is a small fraction of a minority of Minnesotans. Most of Minnesota, Jackie, is operating normal. The vast majority of it is. Tim Walz and Jacob Frey are continuing to put this forward and get it going to the point that their media operatives in Minnesota who help them support their narrative will keep that narrative going.
Dirk, I'll finish with you. You know, we heard the governor's call to residents of that state saying to, collect evidence against ICE. What are you telling your fellow citizens to do?
Right. Before he answers that question, I just want to say, just for comparison, we have exactly the same problems here in the UK. You have a media which controls a narrative, which, tells people what they want them to understand, what they want them to hear. You have government officials, okay, it works slightly differently in America than it does here, who tell the populace that they're responsible for what they want them to hear. And in this case, you've got a situation where a multi-billion-dollar fraud has been uncovered, which we briefly mentioned in the last video I did, and who that fraud was perpetuated by. And looking at the information which I released last night, it's more than obvious that people have got very big questions to answer. And then you have this effective insurrection. Now, the death of that lady is being used politically to try and ratchet all this up again. And it's disgusting. It's disgraceful. That in itself, you look at all the different camera angles, all the different camera footage, it's really ambiguous, at least in the public eye, what went on and what order of events it went on in. It's a powder keg, but as has just been mentioned, there is a big portion of Minnesota that's just normal. And we're seeing all this on the news here. But somebody's got to answer for all this, because it is no good.
Listen, when a law enforcement officer, whether he's federal, state, local, asks you to do something, follow the commands. It's real easy. If they ask for identification, give them identification. If they ask you to leave, leave. I know I've had staff members come up to me and say, what do I do? And I'll just said, follow the rules. It's real easy. You won't get arrested.
And
that sums it up right there. I mean, at the end of the day, I've seen footage of police officers, senior police officers in Minnesota, saying that they'll start arresting and grappling with ICE agents. And I've seen all the rhetoric from the street. It really is a bad state of affairs. But at the end of the day, a police officer tells you to do something, a federal agent tells you to do something, do it. And one thing that really gets me about Walz is, you've seen the other names mentioned, Kelly being one of them. They've all said or done something inflammatory against the President of the United States, the federal government, the Constitution even, and they can't seem to grasp that it's not going to go unanswered. And here in this case, you're talking about criminal charges. When are they going to realize what's going on?
And Senator, any last word with just about 15 seconds left?
As I mentioned, Minnesota would like to see the law enforced. This is our opportunity. The reluctance, or actually resistance, the word that Governor Walz used, the resistance that the Democrats have been placing in front of the rule of law needs to end, and Minnesotans are yearning for these criminals to be removed from our presence and put away.
It was great talking to you both, Minnesota State Senator Steve Drazkowski and resident Dirk Cedergren. It was great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining the Sunday briefing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. Hey, everyone.
Well, there you go. At the end of the day, they're criminals. That's what they've been described as, all criminals running right on the streets. Walz has come out with some inflammatory stuff. When's it going to end? At the end of the day, people need to obey the rule of law. They need to get a handle on this. Otherwise, we're going to see more incidents like what we've seen already. And, if you look at all of the different facts and pieces, this can be dealt with very simply when level-headed people get a handle on the situation and deal with it. We have, you know, a lot in common with America over here, constitutionally at least. And we have laws in our country which deal with this sort of thing. For example, public officials, when they're in a position where they're causing torture, for want of a better word, to innocent people, which in a way you could look at is happening here. Life in prison, no ifs, no buts. Surely in America, this needs coming down on hard. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, leave comments, share my stuff, and I'll talk to you soon. Toodaloo.